Okay, good morning. Thank you all for being with us this morning. I am Lisa Gubernick, VP of Membership for NCJW, and my co-host is Susan Katzman, the immediate past president of NCJW. Susan and I took the month of August off to move my daughter. Well, Susan didn't move my daughter, but she offered emotional support for me. And we took a break, but we have been doing this for more than a year. And we began Coffee Talk as a way to engage our members during a time we could not be together in person. We took a survey, and even though we can get out more these days, you wanted us to continue with Coffee Talk. So here we go. We have a special guest with us today, Ellen Futterman. Before we begin, I'm excited to announce that Ellen will come back to NCJW as we bring another membership event opportunity. Ellen will lead us in a workshop, a two-part workshop in writing our memoirs. So more information will come with that. And okay, on to Ellen. Ellen is the editor-in-chief of the Jewish Light since 2009. She began her career at the Los Angeles Herald Examiner and then moved to Belleville, Illinois, to be a feature writer, columnist, and food editor for the Belleville News Democrat. I bet it was more exciting in Belleville than LA, Ellen.
Yeah, you got it, huh?
Ellen went on to work at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch for 25 years, where she covered hard news, education features, profiles, sports, fashion, and many other areas within the newspaper. She won several awards for her reporting on Women Who Kill and on a 4-part series about teenage pregnancy, children having children. As editor for The Light, she helped the paper win 16 Rock Hour Awards. Thank you very much for being with us this morning, Ellen. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and good morning, everyone.
And there was a picture of Ellen up there for a minute, and thanks for giving that to us. So Ellen, you grew up in Westbury, New York. What was growing up like for you, and do you have siblings?
Well, I'll start with the letter. Yes, I have a younger brother who currently lives in Manalapan, New Jersey. Growing up in Westbury, I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s to middle 70s, and Westbury is located on Long Island, about 40 minutes from the city. My dad took the Long Island Railroad every day into New York. He was a garment center salesman. I mean, is that any more stereotypical Jewish than you can imagine? Yeah. So we were kind of a bedroom suburb. But unlike a lot of places on Long Island, we were pretty well integrated when I was in high school, which was tremendous, but also very interesting time because it was civil rights. And I remember, I think I was in 5th or 6th grade when Martin Luther King, 6th grade, I think, when he was assassinated. And I remember part of my town that was largely African-American, literally burned, went on fire. I mean, the town went up. So it was a very interesting place to grow up because it was not as homogeneous as a lot of other places on Long Island. So I'm really glad I had that experience. So I guess it probably wasn't that different than what U-City was like at that time here, although not being here, I don't know for sure, but it was a great place to grow up.
That's wonderful. So you ended up in LA for work, and what was your path to get there?
Sure. So when I was in high school and looking at colleges, I was about 90% sure I was going to go to a New York State school because that's what my parents could afford and it was what made sense. Now, I was a kid at the time who the farthest west I had been was Pennsylvania. And so I went to a college night and I heard about this school called Washington University, and it was located in St. Louis. And I started reading about it and it sounded so interesting. And I was looking at some pictures of it and I was imagining myself, and I thought St. Louis sounded like such an exotic place in the Midwest. I was like, Mom, Dad, this is my school. I know it. And at the time, unlike today, we just didn't have the income to go looking far flung to schools. I mean, if they were outside of New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, that was it. So my parents said, look, it's a little bit more expensive. Now, mind you, it's nothing like it is today. But if you're okay taking a loan, I think we can swing it. And so I came to WashU sight unseen, and immediately fell in love. Loved it, loved it, loved it. And I did take a junior year, and back then no one was doing this. So it was, I took it with other colleges and so on, but went to London and had that experience, which was wonderful. And then, well, you know, when it came time to graduate, my major was urban studies and sociology, but the only skill I really had was waitressing. So I thought, And a friend at a time said, you know, you're a good writer. You should really think about journalism. And so I went to University of Michigan for their graduate program in journalism. And it was a 3-semester program. And after the first semester, the head of the program, who strangely grew up in St. Louis. I don't know if any of you know the Eisendrath, Charles Eisendrath family. But anyway, he was the head of the program. And he said, you're ready for an internship. And you know, I didn't really want to go because it was the second semester of school. So, but I did it, and it was in Los Angeles. And at the end of the internship, they offered me a job, which is sort of considered a no-no in graduate school. But I was so ready to work after that. So yeah, that's how I wound up in LA. And so, yeah. And then,
did you like LA? Were you?
You know, there was something really fun about being 22 years old, driving around, you know, with the ocean and whatever. But it was hard to be a reporter because, I mean, the traffic, New York had bad traffic, but the traffic in LA at the time was, you know, so one of my first assignments, I'll briefly tell you this, one of my first assignments was a single engine plane crash. A guy was flying a plane, he went into a tree and he died. And I, as the reporter covering it, got to the site before the FAA. So it was the first time I'd ever seen, quite honestly, a dead, burned body just in the plane because they couldn't remove anything till the FAA came there. So it was an interesting place to be a reporter. And also because of all the celebrities, you know, I mean, it was like, oh, I hung out with Jane Fonda, you know, and Jerry Brown, and I hung out with, you know, it was just kind of a fun place for a young person. So I really enjoyed it. But the driving around really, it wears on you, and the expense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you made your way back to the Midwest.
I did.
With the job, as I mentioned, the Belleville News Democrat.
I actually came back, Lisa, and I moved back to St. Louis, and I didn't move to Belleville. I commuted from St. Louis. I did the opposite commute. Yeah.
Okay. And so you worked there in Belleville, and then you went to the Post-Dispatch, where you were there for 25 years. Do you want to talk about why you left LA and what drew you back?
Sure, I'd be glad to. What draws a lot of us, in my case, love, right? I wish I could give you a better answer, but love. My boyfriend at the time was also a journalist, and he decided to go to law school, and we had met at Washington U, and he got into Washington U Law School. So I came back with him, and I worked, actually, before I went to Belleville, I worked for a year at WashU. And it was an interest in the admissions office, and it was an interesting job, but it wasn't for me, and I really wanted journalism. And so when Belleville had an opening, I took it, and then I came to the Post a year later. So that was nice that I got hired right away. We wound up getting married, and when we got divorced, I was 29 years old or 30, I was pretty young. We didn't have any children. And I thought about leaving the Post and going, you know, because I wasn't from St. Louis. But I'll be honest with you, I really had grown to love it. And as a single person in my early 30s who was going out and doing a lot of things, what I loved was I could go hear music, or I could go anywhere and still be home in bed by 11:15, you know, wake up the next morning for work. So I just wound up staying in St. Louis, and then, you know, eventually met my current husband, and, you know, here I am. So I think it was a very good decision on my part.
I do too, for us. So 25 years is a long time to be at the Post-Dispatch. Are there any memorable moments or things that you would rather forget?
Oh, it was really a wonderful 25 years. And to be honest, I probably wouldn't have left had they not offered buyouts. And my brother told me, you know, that younger brother who has a lot better math sense than I do. That's why I went into journalism. But he said, when someone offers you money to leave a job, maybe you should take it. But I had great 25 years there. I had probably 10 or 15 different jobs, starting as a general assignment reporter. When I left, I was the editor of the everyday section, which when it was really a section filled with stories and everything. But for a while, I was the movie critic and the critic at large. And those were the days when we were like flying off to junkets in LA and in New York. And so it was fun because not only was I reviewing movies, but I was getting to meet movie stars and sitting down and talking with them. So, you know, I honestly can tell you that Michelle Pfeiffer is as beautiful as she looks with no makeup on. But I can also tell you that Madonna doesn't look so good in the morning. So, you know, but I have a few favorites. I wrote about this. I had a wonderful interview with Jerry Stiller when he came to the Jewish Book Festival, and we kind of it set off a writing friendship, like with holiday cards and that kind of thing. So that was a lot of fun. But my favorite celebrity story is I can't remember what movie he was in, but it was the day of my 20th high school reunion, and I was in New York, and I was divorced at the time, and I was interviewing Robert Redford. Now, I've loved Robert Redford since, you know, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And Robert Redford is the kind of guy who says your name when he's talking to you, which I find very intimate and kind of sexy. So he's saying like, well, Ellen, and this Ellen. And I'm like, you know, we're clearly got a rapport. And I remember looking at him and saying, Mr. Redford, I don't know what you're doing tonight, but it's my 20th high school reunion. And if you don't have any plans and you want to come with me, I think, and he laughed, he was so sweet. And he said, I'm sure you're going to have a good time. And I did, but you know, he was just really nice. So I have a soft spot for Robert Redford.
Did he look as good in person?
You know, he's a little craggy, but yes, he's got unbelievable eyes, and he has great hair. You know, he really does have great hair. And I just saw him, and I was Netflix flicking over the weekend. I just watched a movie with him and Jennifer Lopez in it. And there's something about him. He's got so much charisma, and he's so socially out there that it's kind of nice. Yeah.
So are there any, I mean, you've told us a few, but are there any like crazy stories or anything?
Oh gosh.
For your years.
You know, I think the stories that you want to forget, I don't know if forget's the right word, but the stories that are painful, you know, are the ones where children die. You know, those are the hard stories. And I don't know if you guys remember, it was many years ago, and I can't even, I think it was one of the Parkway Junior Highs where there was a shooting, and this was way before Columbine and way before anyone was cut. And I remember being involved in that case, and it was just heartbreaking. You know, it was heartbreaking all around for the family of the kid who was shot, for the family of the shooter. And I just remember, I wasn't a parent at the time, and I just remember like feeling some kind of, I don't know, it's just very hard emotionally. And I think that those are the stories that, you know, people ask sometimes. Like I remember with obituaries, knocking on doors and talking to people who had just lost somebody very close to them, especially a child, and then having to ask for a picture. And, you know, but what I realized, and I still think that, is that what I could do as a journalist is go back and write a really fine obituary that these folks could cut out and keep for the rest of their lives. And it seemed to give them some peace. So on some of those hard assignments, I find like, I don't know, just if you're empathetic with folks and really, you know, kind of try to meet them where they are, they tend to open up, and they're actually grateful in a way. So those make some of the harder assignments a little easier.
Yeah. And you won, as I mentioned, some national writing awards while you were at the Post. The Women Who Kill and Children Having Children were two of those. What drew you to those stories?
I think generally speaking, I'm always drawn to social justice kinds of stories. I'm always interested in trying to understand how different people see the world and what their experience is. And I'm a storyteller. That's what journalists do. In the case of the Women Who Kill, those stories came around the time that some legislation was changing about domestic violence and what could be brought into evidence. And, you know, the fact that battered women were just rising up and couldn't take it anymore. And so it was pretty groundbreaking at the time. And like most stories that you wind up writing series about, they most often start as one story. You know, you have an assignment, and while you're on it, sort of things start developing and you realize there's more to it and you want to kind of drill deeper. So that's kind of how that started. It was a domestic abuse thing where this woman was arrested, and you know, I kind of got into covering that, and then that led me to a couple of lawyers and who were working with other women who were in the similar situation where they had been in prison because they were battered women. And so we went to Chillicothe, and I interviewed and spoke to several, and I went with a photographer, and we did the series all in black and white portraits of the women and their stories and what was going on with legislation. So that was a really interesting one. And the one on children having children, way back in the day, and in the day being when I was doing this, there was a school on Hampton, not far from where that Denny's used to be, if it's still there. I don't know if, you know, anyway, there was a school that was in the St. Louis school system that was for pregnant girls. So if you got pregnant, they would kind of ship you off there. And through that, I was so, again, covering, you know, just kind of doing a story, starting to talk and thinking, there might be some things here. And, you know, I did kind of was able to get some younger, you know, young girls, their parents, whatever, to work with me. And we did the story about the cycle of teenage parenthood. And very often with the people I was writing about, their parents had been teen parents and so on. So it was kind of an interesting series of stories around that. But again, most of them start as one story.
Right. And it just evolves.
Yeah, I mean, one other one that I think is worth mentioning is I did a series very early in my time in the Post on the St. Louis gay community, which does not sound like it was much, but back then AIDS had just started, and you know, we were just finding out about it. And I found myself, and I was new at the Post, and I found myself writing about AIDS, but there was no context for it. Mm-hmm. So I made this pitch that I really wanted to take a look at the gay community in St. Louis. And I did, you know, I was going to gay bars, male, female, there was a newspaper called the Gay News Telegraph, and Jim Thomas was the editor of that. And he and I became very good friends, and he was incredibly helpful with that. And I fought tooth and nail to get that. It was 3 stories to get them into the Post. I was met with a lot of, you know, pushback.
If you got a lot, and you did.
Oh my gosh! And and the versions that ran were slightly watered down than what I had written, because I really wrote, like, there was so much energy in the rooms that I was going into the clubs, and I really wanted to convey that. And so that was rough. And I look back, you know, and people wouldn't let me use their name. I mean, how different it was then than it is now. And, you know, this was like the late 80s. Yeah. So it's just, that was an interesting experience for me. It was a little frustrating at the time, but boy, how things have changed in some ways. Not so much in others.
Well, that was courageous of you to do that story at that time. Well, thank you. I'm going to turn it over. Susan has more questions for you.
Have you ever wanted to go back and follow up on any of those stories?
Yes, actually, I tried really hard on the couple that I wrote. There was one young couple for the children having children story that I really, I tried so hard to find them, and I couldn't because I was really curious what happened to their kids. Because, you know, by the time I was looking for them, they would have had kids old enough to be teenagers. And I just was really curious as to what was happening, but I didn't have much luck. But every so often, yeah, there are. I mean, even now with stories like at the beginning of COVID, I know all of you know the story about the Winehouse family. You know, there were 5 members of the same family who had COVID, but it was like back in March 2020. She was the preschool teacher at Temple Israel and so on. And, you know, I've stayed up to date with them. I mean, the husband, Michael, has had long haul. And, you know, I try to check in with them every so often to sort of see how they're doing and what's going on. And I try to do that with a number of the people who I have written about, just because I do think, and I know, Susan, you didn't say this, but I will. I mean, I do think the media can be really fickle, and it's like you do a story and then you're off. And I don't have to do that anymore. I work in a community, and I feel like part of my job is kind of keeping up with some of the people who I've written about, you know, especially the ones who kind of really could use that extra support.
Okay. I'm going to shift gears a little and bring us away from LA and in the Post and to the Jewish Light. You joined the Jewish Light in 2009 as editor. And I know it's been stated that under you, the Light has won 16 Rockover Awards. I hadn't heard of those before, but they are considered the Jewish Pulitzer. What's been important for you working at the Light? Where was your head when you took on the editor's position?
Yeah, sure. So when I left the Post, I was 50 years old, and I had a child in 4th grade. So I wasn't able to retire or about to retire or anything like that. My husband's an educator, and he's a principal. Well, he's retired now, but he's a retired principal. But at the time, he was a 5th grade teacher. And so, you know, I definitely needed to work. And when I left the Post, I figured, well, I'm going to have to work in PR or something, because there's no other place for me to go. I mean, the Riverfront Times didn't seem like the right fit for a 50-year-old woman, and St. Louis Magazine mostly does freelance, and I just didn't think that there'd be any opportunity. So I wound up taking a PR job with a firm, and it was a good job. I got it, you know, even before I left the Post, they had offered it to me. So I worked there, and I knew very quickly it wasn't really what I wanted at all. So within a year's time, I found out that so I can't even remember who told me, but that the Light was looking for an editor. And at the time, Larry Levin was the CEO and publisher, and you all from NCJW know Larry well because his wife works with you. But we met, you know, several times, and I got the job. And it was such a blessing to me, because I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure I would have wanted to start my career out at a weekly niche newspaper like the Light, but for where I was at in my life, it was like, you know, Cinderella trying on the glass slipper. It was just a great fit for me. And so, you know, I came to the Light with not a tremendous knowledge of the Jewish community at all. You know, I belonged to a synagogue, but for the most part, I flew under the radar as far as that went. So, you know, there was a learning curve like anything else, and there continues to be a learning curve. But that's the beauty of what makes me happy and what I do, is that there is so much to learn, and every day is a little bit different. I mean, I always get to write and edit, but I'm learning about all different kinds of things. So always to me, again, is that social justice theme that's very important. And so when I put my energies out, I try to kind of cast a net as wide as possible around social justice. So one of the things I'm very proud about is starting, you know, with the help of my board at the time and Larry, the Unsung Heroes event, which NCJW has always had a number of people who have, including your back to school store last year. So that has been something great. I've done a series there on mental health, and that's something I continue to want to do stories about. I'm always interested in stories about, well, the BRCA gene and women in cancer, something that I've done a lot with, and I think that paper's done a lot with. I'm a news hound. I'm going to be, you know, I like good news stories, and I also love writing about people and features, and I like that as well. And to me, the Light has that wonderful opportunity of bringing all those elements together. You know, what's going on in the community. We get to celebrate everybody's, you know, good nachas with our newsmakers. And I see my friend Elise is on the call, and she was so instrumental in getting that started. And, you know, we have feature stories and news stories. And so I always say it's in the mix. And journalism is changing so much. I don't know how many of you get our daily, except for Saturday, newsletters. But that's
great.
Yeah, that's a whole new thing. And I hope for those of you on this call that don't get it, I'd appreciate it if you'd at least take a look at it. Just go to stljewishlight.org and you can sign up. They're free. But, those kinds, the way we're changing and growing, whatever, it's kind of exciting. I've been in this business for 43 years and I probably have had to reinvent myself about, I don't know, 10 or 12 times, but it's really interesting how much I learn, through this whole process, because newspapers really are changing so much. I don't know, everybody says they're going to go away at some point. I sure hope not, just because I think there's something really lovely about sitting down with a newspaper, but we'll see. I don't know. I mean, it's hard, and we're a not-for-profit, and advertising is tough all the way around. People don't have the budget, so we've got to invent new ways to bring people news that is real news that they can enjoy and learn from.
Right. We have an unsung hero this year coming up also, Carolyn Satz.
Yes, that's correct.
So we're real excited about that. Regarding the light, you've talked about some of the different stories and views of journalism. Has the job with the light changed your views of the St. Louis Jewish community at all?
Yeah, it has. I don't know that I had, strong views one way or the other before coming to work in it. I mean, I have met some of the most creative, kindest people, who also work in the Jewish community. I know that there are some politics involved in the Jewish community. I try to, I go into my Columbo-esque sort of journalist thing, like I'm sort of oblivious to that, because I figure why not? That's the best way to approach it. But I'm not stupid, and I am aware sometimes. And so, but that's the way it is anywhere. But in terms of, I think the benefits so far outweigh anything that, might make something difficult. I'd say, it's interesting, Susan. When I was at the Post, the issue that was the hot issue was abortion. And whenever I would do a story about abortion, I literally counted paragraphs, how many would be considered, say, pro women's rights that way, and pro-life the other way, that kind of thing. That was such a hot button issue then. In the Jewish community, it's Israel. Israel is a very interesting, it elicits opinions, and people, it's a hard one to bring people together around. And I had no idea that would be the case when I took the job. I never really thought about it. So that's been interesting to see, how that plays itself out as well. But for me, as I said, this job has been a blessing and an honor, and it's really allowed me to make so many friendships that I know will last long after I leave the job. So it's very positive.
Is there a checklist for the life where you make sure, such as the Israel topic, that there's several views? If you're going to write about Israel, not you, but the paper,
I know what you're saying.
That there's several different opinions about Israel, or but just that there's a checklist of topics you want to be sure.
I kind of think I think I know where you're going. So not so much a checklist, or with everything we put out, we have this opinion, so we have to have that. But we've worked hard to my feeling is that we want to make the tent, as I like to call it, as wide open as possible. So we make sure we try to have as many different opinions as there are many different ways, many different kinds of people in the Jewish community. So there's no one way to be Jewish. There's no, not all Jews are Democrats and liberal. And we have Marty Rochester to prove it. So, but we also have Eric Mink. And, they are as different as they, so part of my job as editor is to try to bring in as diverse an opinions as we can. And when there are issues that I think are important that need to be written about, I may, reach out to my friends at NCJW, as I often, as I have, and say, hey, is there anyone, are you working on this? Or Ellen or Jessa or Heather might, ask me, are you interested in this, that kind of thing. I check in with folks. My associate editor, Eric Berger, does. Mike Sherwin, the manager, we check in with people and that we haven't heard for a while. I might give Hershey Novak a call over at WashU. Hey, Hershey, what's going on? That kind of thing. So I try to make sure that people understand that their opinions are welcome. As long as they're not committing libel or slander, that kind of thing, and they're based in fact. Diverging opinions are important, and we get a lot of pushback on certain pieces. Most recently, the critical race theory piece that Marty did. People were outraged, and somebody said, I'm canceling my subscription, which of course is free, but still, we don't want anyone to cancel. We don't want anyone to cancel. But my feeling is, look, you don't have to agree, and please write a letter to the editor, or please, that's what it's there for, write me a commentary that may rebuff that. So, I do think that these folks get us to think, even if we don't like what they're writing about. And I see the light as we're doing our job when we get a conversation going among readers on an issue. And I think that that's really important. So I do try to make sure that we are on top of the news and we are as inclusive of everyone in our community as we can be.
Have you ever, at the Post, at the LA Times, have you ever, or at the Light, have you ever been pressured about doing or not doing a story?
Yes. Yes.
How'd you handle that?
I think sometimes, I'm trying to think. I think if I really felt as a reporter, something wasn't a story, it was up to me to explain that to my editor as to why. If it was like, too bad, this is it, you got to do it. I mean, unless, there might have been a time that I objected because of my own principles on something. I can't remember what, but, I remember early on in my career, I was actually with the LA Herald Examiner, which does not exist anymore. But I had an editor who sent me to this area. There had been some kind of crime spree, but it was an area where people only spoke Spanish. I said, that doesn't make any sense. I don't speak Spanish. I don't understand. I took French. I don't get it. And he said, sorry, go. So I went, I tried to find a few people who spoke English. Nobody did. I waited a little time. I went back and, sometimes it's just ridiculous when you get pressured into something that is not going to yield a story. Other times, it's nothing ever anything bad. Sometimes at the Post, there would be a story that one of the higher ups wanted us to do that was just kind of a foolish story to me. It didn't make much, but it wasn't, no fair, no foul. It wasn't anything that was reprehensible. It might have been a story on, the managing editor at the Times, not Mike, but, at the Post, something that somebody had his ear on something. And so he wanted a story about it. That's more what you get than anybody else. I mean, at least that's been my experience.
Okay. Thanks. And I do want to tell our listeners that in a few minutes, we'll pause and take questions from the audience. So if you have questions, feel free to either put them in the chat or put your hand up and Lisa and I'll call on you. Okay, some more questions for you.
Okay.
Something we have not talked about, Ellen. Have you had any challenges being a female in print journalism industry?
Well, I look back and there are certainly things that have happened that had they happened today would have been handled differently than when they happened back in, the 80s or the 90s. even the early 2000s when I think about it. You know, just things that were probably inappropriate that went on. I mean, I don't want to say anything bad about the dead, but remember, I worked in a newsroom with Jerry Berger for a lot of years, you know, and Jerry, though I think seemingly harmless, you know, probably in the Me Too generation would not be able to do some of the things that he did. But I never felt threatened or you know, taken advantage of by anyone like Jerry. I think what I saw a little bit of was, I think that as a female reporter at the Post, and I know that there were other females who even felt this more strongly than me, because I did get my fair share of, you know, pretty good out-of-town assignments. But I think there was a feeling that oftentimes the women got passed up for the men to do those, you know, overseas assignments, that kind of thing. And that kind of bothered me, you know, to be honest with you. I really feel like it wasn't always the best one to go. That's, you know, and it was almost always the males who were going. Now, whether or not, you know, I'm sure there was some kind of male thinking that, oh, well, they'll be safer, or they're going with a male photographer, or whatever it was. But there were sure some assignments that I would have loved to have been able to do, but you know, I was. And the other thing I think that happened too, more at a place like the Post, and I think this happened in the day at daily newspapers, where you kind of got pegged. You know, were you more features? Were you more hard news? Were you more investigate? Like those kinds of things. And I think that my strength has always been in writing personality profiles and feature stories. And so, you know, like I said, I got some great assignments too that I was able to do. But I do think that when it came down to some of the tougher ones, they went to the men over the women, at least back then. I don't know if it's changed.
So not just from a female point of view, but in general, if some young people, and I'm sure they have, came to you to talk about a career in print journalism today, what advice would you give them?
Well, I'm not sure what that's going to look like going forward. I've been lucky enough to have some tremendous interns, and we also have a teen page. We've had it for many years called Or Hadash. And a number of those young people have been interested in pursuing print journalism, and have one of them currently works like for Monsanto, or you know, has gone into PR. I don't know what's going to happen, Susan, to be honest with you, when it comes to the future in print journalism. I'd like to believe that our country is filled with readers who like long form journalism and really enjoy stories that you see like in the New Yorker and the New York Times and so on, that are really, you know, deep reads. I don't think that's going to go away. And I think that's always appreciated. But there is a lot of movement, pressure, whatever you want to call it, digitally to feed content, because you have to keep producing content. I call it the beast. You know, you have to feed the beast, which is content. So there's also a need to put out some short form stuff. So very often now in newsrooms, if you're working on a story, you might be asked to just do a couple of paragraphs just to get the news out, you know, especially if it's a news story. And then you go back in and you can expand as you get more information. I wouldn't tell anyone not to go into this field, because I think it's tremendous. I mean, you get to meet so many people. You're telling their stories. It's while you're writing and reporting and doing that every day, you're doing it about different kinds of people. It's not the kind of job that's always like a clock in. Sometimes you get, you know, I wake up at 5 in the morning and might decide that's the best time for me to write or whatever. There's a lot of flexibility. But I would tell them that I'm not sure what the future holds, and that they need to have the ability to be flexible and, you know, think of ways to tell their stories, not just in print, but also digitally and, you know, through video, those kinds of things as well. Like, I think you have to be, like, you have to multitask today in journalism like never before, because you really need those skills.
Yeah, if there's a few things I've heard you kind of say here in this past half hour, I've heard flexibility, multitasking, being well read and being prepared. Thank you.
Sure.
If we were to come into your bedroom now, what's on your nightstand that you're reading?
I'm reading Brandy Carlisle's memoir. Brandy Carlisle is one of my favorite singer-songwriters, and my husband gave me the book, and I'm really enjoying it. And she just played Saturday night. Unfortunately, I wasn't there, but she just played in Columbia, Missouri. But I'm a big fan of hers, so I'm reading that. And I am also reading about Medicare. I'm reading because I'm about to turn 65. And so I'm reading like what I need to know about all these things as I try to figure all of that out. So that's what's on there right now.
Well, we have a couple people on this coffee talk show who could help advise you on that over 65. So ask us some questions if you want. We want to do a real quick lightning round with you. So I'm going to give you a word and tell us what it makes you think of. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Carbon paper.
Mimeograph machines.
And your career?
Oh, in my career, when I started, we typed on the carbons. Okay, so it was before computer. Now I'm not dating, like I'm not ancient. Okay, I just told you I'm going to be 65. But so we went to computers pretty quickly in LA. But my first few months where we would type it, and then you cut and paste. So you take the, you'd pick it apart, and then if you were moving paragraphs or you'd edit, and that was how. And then you took off the bottom parts of the carbon and whatever, you gave it to your editor. So that's how we started.
Okay. And were your fingers purple from?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And I only type with 2 fingers too, the Art Buchwald way. So yeah. Uh-huh.
I was an educator, so our fingers were purple all the time. Second one, Madonna.
Black Roots. So when I met Madonna and I interviewed Madonna, it was in LA, and she came to the interview and her hair was sopping wet. But what I remember is that she had black roots till about here, and then the blonde hair. And you could not, and you had to be careful not to ask her a yes or no question, because if you did, she'd answer yes or no. So you had to ask her something that was open-ended if you were hoping to get anything out of her. And I'm sure she was just tired and didn't want to meet with a bunch of, what she would think of as hacks. But yeah, she wasn't as warm and fuzzy as some of those other folks who I've spoken with.
Gotcha. Your favorite food?
Pizza.
Okay.
Pizza. Emos, it's funny. As a New Yorker, you're like, ooh, emos and whatever. But I guess I'm been westernized now because I love emos. I love it. And it's like taken me, however long I've lived here. But, and now that thick New York pizza, I don't like it so much. So it's funny what will happen.
The Beatles.
John. I was a John girl. But I do remember the other thing is when he was shot. I think about that a lot. But I also love some of the I've done stories on like crazy Beatle fans, and I think about them too, like going into their house with Beatle memorabilia that was beyond your wildest imagination. So conjures up a lot of good memories.
Shoes.
God, the fact that I think I own more than probably maybe everyone on this call, I don't know. I have I love shoes. I do. I just do. And my favorite day during the pandemic was when the National Council of Jewish Women Resale Shop had some kind of event with Marmy, and I came in, I bought 4 pairs of shoes for $7.50 each. It was like such a score.
Right. That was a good deal.
It was a good deal. The Westbury Dragons, I think about, and friends. I'm sure all of you are the same. You're in touch with a few of your high school friends, and I don't know, there's something cool about that. But I was sort of a nerd in high school and goody two shoes. So, I think about all the clubs I was in and stuff like that. And it wasn't until I got to college that I became a little rowdier.
Okay. Jerry Burger.
Hey, babe. I think of the elevator rides from the ground floor to the 5th floor of the Post Dispatch where we worked, and listening to Jerry regale me with his stories. I mean, they were crazy, and I never knew what to believe. He thought every male person was gay, or had, as he said, a gay man trying to get out. And the other thing, sadly, I think about with Jerry is cigarettes, because he smoked like a chimney. And in the end, even though he didn't die of lung cancer, he had no voice left for the last 10 years of his life. He could only whisper. And obviously the cigarettes didn't help that. But he was a character. Probably that's the word I think of the most. He was the end of a dying breed in a way, of the gossip columnists at newspapers.
Was it true that people really called him with lots of tips and?
Yeah, I think he also had his insiders, placed in government, city government, county government. He had sources who would give him information. But, there's something about seeing your name in what we call boldface in the newspaper that is exciting to folks. And so, there was the fear that Jerry was going to write about something that you didn't want him to write about, but there was also the intrigue of being in his column for something else that was, considered a happy thing. So
Right.
Yes, it is true. It is true. People did call him all the time.
Passover.
My Granny Rose. I've written about this. I think that for a lot of us, part of being Jewish is the cultural part of the memories we have with our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents around meals. And cooking with my Granny Rose was a huge part of that for me. And that's whose memory I try to honor each year when I cook. I mean, I think about her and I think about her recipes. Very recently, I had all my family over we get together every so often for Sunday dinners and stuff. And we were joking, it was Rosh Hashanah, and we were joking about Passover, like, why didn't I make kasha? And my older son said, oh, you mean the sand that you make every year for whatever? And my younger said, like, yeah, what's that all about, Mom? I'm like, how do you not love it? It's so delicious. And they're like, well, we eat it, but we know why you're making it, but we don't love it. So it's just kind of funny that was the dish that my grandmother made so beautifully that I've championed, that I now find out my kids think tastes like sand, but what are you going to do?
And your favorite foreign city?
Wow. Geez, that is tough. That is so tough. I've been lucky enough to travel a lot of places. Gosh,
Just one.
Yeah, I guess. I love Dingle, Ireland. I just love it. I just thought it was one of the best times I've ever had. I just loved it. It's a small fishing village in Ireland, and there's tons of great art, tons of great music, and tons of beauty. And the food was also delicious because it's a fishing village and it's a foodie city. They actually have a big food thing. And I don't know, it was just a wonderful, magical place.
Thank you.
Sure.
Two last real quick questions, and we're going to open it up. We always ask this of every one of our guests. What are you most proud of, and how do you feel you've made a difference in the world?
Well, I'm without a doubt most proud of my family. I'm part of a blended interfaith family that gets along beautifully. My stepchildren have enriched my life beyond anything I can imagine. And they've embraced the biological child my husband and I have had. I think of my 3 kids as my 3 kids. I think of my daughter-in-law as my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren as my grandchildren. I mean, it's just wonderful. And part of that started with the fact that my husband's ex-wife is also an integral part of our family. And it's important to me. So I'm really proud of the way that whole thing has gone. It's been with, you always have strife and there's always issues with children and whatever, but not the typical what you hear kind of, step things and all that. Right. So I'm really proud of that. And then I guess professionally, I'm proud of my reputation. I really am. I think that I've worked in this for a long time, and I think people know they can come talk to me and that I am empathetic, and I'm not out to burn or hurt anybody. I'm reminded very quickly of a story I did on a woman named Debbie Yao. I don't know if you guys remember Debbie Yao, but she was the one of the first female athletic directors at SLU. And then she was at SLU, and I did a profile on her. And during the profile, and I was in the room with the photographer, and the profile, she told me that she had had an abortion. And I thought to myself, wow, wait, did I hear that right? You know, she's working at a Catholic school and she's telling me she had an abortion. Could this possibly be good for her career? I mean, why is and I said to the photographer, did you hear that? And Karen said, yes, I heard that and whatever. And I remember I didn't know what to do about it. I mean, she said it, whatever, but I wound up calling her and saying, Debbie, you know, you mentioned this, and I'd like to write about it, but I'd like to talk to you about it. And she said, no, I want you to write about it. And we talked about it. But I felt like a lot of other reporters, I would not have done that. And I don't know that I should have. Like, I'm not, I shouldn't tell her. But you got it. At the end of the day, you have to go to sleep with yourself. And if you feel you've done anything that's been hurtful to someone, or, what's so hard about checking? And no, yeah, maybe if she said, don't include that, it wouldn't have been the same story, but it's still been a good story. So I feel good that that's the way I've chosen to live my career, whether or not what kind of impact I'll leave on this world I've made in journalism. I don't know. I don't know that it's anything more than a little whatever, but I'm proud of the things we do at the Light. I'm proud of, the work I've done at the, former jobs. And, I don't really have any regrets.
Maybe
beautiful. That's what I'm most proud of.
Right. Thank you. No, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you for answering Lisa's and my questions.
Sure.
So let's go to a couple in the chat here. First one, can you address fake news and the impact on the United States?
I don't even know what to say about that, because it's so hard. I mean, everybody thinks they're a writer. Everyone is putting out, quote, news 24/7. People believe all kinds of things that are put out there, whether or not they're true or not. I think this whole fake news, well, I don't want to get super political about it because we don't have much time, and I don't know that that's going to change anything. I don't think it's good, okay? I don't think fake news, and the impact on the United States has been a very great thing. However, I do think it has made people question things more and maybe search for answers, a little bit more, at least thinking people. And I think that's a good thing.
Okay. What relationship, that question came from Leslie Jacobson. Susan Whitty's asking, what relationship, if any, do you have with other faith-based or cultural local newspapers?
Great question, Susan. A very good one. First of all, the Light is part of a Jewish Journalism Fellowship funded by the Maimonides Fund. And it's us and the Jewish paper in San Francisco, in Cleveland, in Pittsburgh, and then TC Jufo, which is a digital only in Minneapolis. And so we've been meeting since January via Zoom to talk. The whole thing, our whole fellowship is about, digital first in Jewish journalism and how's that changing and how does it interface with your paper and so on. So we've been meeting on Zoom. And actually in November, they're flying us to New York so we can meet in person. And we finished that fellowship in January. So that's been great. The Light is also members of the American Jewish Press Association, which meets every year. St. Louis was lucky enough to host that in 2019. And so I'm the first vice president of that organization. And so I'm in very close contact. We meet 4 times a year in terms of meetings, but we put on webinars and we do all other kinds of things. So I'm very close with those partners as well. In terms of local papers, we just ran a story in our last paper that we've been running on Misha Marshall, who is a youngish, I guess 38, right, youngish to me, Black woman who we've been following during COVID, and her hope is to go to nursing school, but she's had several detours along the way. And that we run the story, but St. Louis American is also going to be running the story. We've had, we've had a number of, we did a series on hate crimes that you might remember in conjunction with NPR, with, KWMU, and at the time, The Beacon. If you might remember that there was for a while an online paper here started by a number of ex-post people called The Beacon. And so we've worked with them, and we're always interested in partnering, if it makes sense, with a publication to do stories. So, and though I wouldn't call them newspapers, I mean, we certainly partner with a lot of local Jewish organizations as well. But yeah, I think we have a very good relationship. And I don't mean to brag, but I really feel like the Light in the Jewish world is considered really one of the top, well, I would say newspapers, but now media outlets, because we're so much more.
Right. Which is very much attributable to you and your work, which is outstanding.
Thank you.
Let's do it. Last real quick question here from Sandra Shapiro. Why do reporters have to give their opinions rather than just the news?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think that if a reporter is doing a news story and you're finding that reporter's opinion in there, that's a problem. That really is a problem. And I think if someone called me and said, I thought this was a news story and I'm seeing this opinion, I would be more than happy to have a conversation with them about that, because if that's the case, that shouldn't be. But if a reporter is doing an opinion piece or a commentary piece, whatever you want to call it, then it makes sense. But I always put sports reporters in a different thing, because a lot of them tend to be fans as well. But if I'm old school, I'm totally old school. But if you're a reporter, and you're writing a news story, even a good feature story, we don't need to hear from you. You keep yourself out of it. So I'm not sure why they do that. I'm very careful with my own writing to distinguish when I'm writing a column, which I do, to when I'm writing not just a news story or news feature is usually what I do.
Right. Let me do the last real quick question. This is from Ellen Alper. How do you decide what's newsworthy when somebody submits something to the Light for publication?
Well, certainly if it's, if it's in response to something that we're covering, then of course it's newsworthy. But if somebody has a strong feeling about, say something on climate change, and even though we're not covering it, but they feel it's important, that's an issue that we feel is important too. So I would welcome those kinds of stories as well. I think what Ellen is probably meaning too is when you decide it's not newsworthy and you've got to tell somebody, well, that doesn't really fit right now. And, there are things that arrive at your desk that people want you to write about that, quite frankly, seem like non sequiturs to you. Like, why would I be doing this or whatever? And then, sometimes if it's just not the right fit for us for whatever reason, then that's part of my job to explain that. But it would have to really be something out of left field, because for the most part, my policy, as long as it's written well, and as I said, it's factual, it's not, you're not saying things about other people that aren't true, but as long as it checks those boxes, and even though it might not be as topical as something else, if we have room for it in the paper, I would probably include it. We always have room for those kinds of things online. And I think you'll see more opinions that sometimes just run online because maybe they are a little off topic, but worth putting in there. But, it really just depends on what else is going on too. If there's a lot of topical news, then something somebody sends in may not make it in because of that.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you so much from both Lisa and me and all of us here for a great program today and a great interview. I was talking to somebody a week ago about the coffee talk coming up, and you were our person. And the comment the lady made was that during the pandemic, she really had a chance to really sit down and read the Light. And that now that she was back working and doing stuff, she's still reading it because she found it very valuable and hadn't really taken the time before. So I suspect there's a lot of people who have experienced the same thing in the past year. So thank you again. Thank you for answering all our questions.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I always welcome anyone from on this or whatever to contact me if you have story ideas or want to talk some things over or whatever it is. I'm very easy to reach. E. Futterman and STL, jewishlight.org. And I'm happy to be in touch and I appreciate it. And, you know, if I leave you with anything, it's the, you know, why I like my job too is the ability to connect the Jewish community. That's a big part of what we do. It's part of our mission. And, you know, I hope we can do that better and better every day because we have a very cool community with a lot of talent. And the more we can tell all of your stories, I think the better we're serving not only the St. Louis Jewish community, but the community at large.
Right. And we have a very diversified community, becoming even more so.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And we want to thank everybody for tuning in with us. We want to thank Bottle Up Chefs, who is our sponsor for these few months. And our next program is October 26th. We can't tell you right now all of what it will entail, but it's a Halloween surprise. So we'll be revealing that in the next week. So on behalf of Lisa and me and NCJW, thank you. Have a good week. And thanks for being with us. Stay well, everybody. Thank you, Ellen.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.